Hey everyone, I thought I would come out here to Lake Georgetown to do my next chapter's recording, but as you can see, Lake Georgetown is still frozen and there's nowhere to sit. So that was a fun drive anyway, and it's really beautiful out here and it's a lovely day, but lots of snow still and I'm not used to that. So I guess I'll go back to the apartment to do my recordings and I'll see you guys later. Chapter 7, Yattol. I watched the tent flap settle closed behind Marilyn and let out all the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I never would have believed it, but she reminded me of her father. Still, for all her strength, I kept hearing her words rolling around in my thoughts. I want to go home. Maybe I'd misjudged her. Maybe she wasn't the strong, enduring type, but only too timid to speak until I'd pushed her past her limits. Maybe Onethil should never have brought her across the stars. But from what he and the other brethren had told me in their strange, riddled way, time was running out, and Onethil at least seemed to think she was ready. I only hoped he was right. I couldn't imagine him being wrong. I sighed and tilted my head back. In the morning we would find out what she was made of. General Ciaret would send word ahead to Master Anhila at his post in the outlands, telling him we would be coming. Coming for counsel, for answers, or maybe just a smile of pity at our confusion. I'm sure I didn't know, but it seemed as good a place to go as any. I had almost expected him to send us north to Alcalon, but maybe Ciaret thought, as I did, that we would not likely get any counsel worth hearing from the king and his circle. I just hoped the girl could endure another trek across the Pearstone. We would be out in the open, lonely desert for a long time, and complaints ring louder over the sand than in the forest. The high boughs of a distant tree shook suddenly, tremoring like a fever. My focus snapped to the watchman's stand just outside the camp, where I could just see the soldier shimmying out of it down the smooth trunk. I lost sight of him when he hit the ground behind one of the tents. Then a moment later he reappeared, running straight for me. That couldn't be a good sign. "Yattol," he hissed, searching for me in the darkness. "Here," I said, and moved closer to a ring of torchlight. "What?" "Ungolian fiends," the man said. His name was Merrick, I remembered, new recruit from my home city. "They're almost here. Where did they come from? What are they doing here so close to the camp?" His eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer to me. "That girl you brought to the camp with you, are they following her?" I didn't like the tone in his question. The watchman was twitchy, getting paler by the second. Though I knew his name from the last time I'd been in this camp, I knew nothing else about him. If he was one of the men Arleo had tried to warn me about, I didn't know. It wasn't worth the risk. "She is no one," I said, "and they're following me." Both statements verged close to a lie, but there was enough truth in each of them to satisfy me. Merrick cursed under his breath. "Where are they?" I asked, to shift the conversation. I couldn't count on biting back the harsh words I desperately wanted to say to him. "How many?" "Near the forest's edge. I counted 5. "Damn," I said. And that was exactly why I had chosen to take the girls to the camp instead of staying at the portal. There was no way either of us would have survived an engagement like that. I'd hoped, foolishly, that if any Ngullian were surveilling the girl, the Watcher would be able to distract them, keep them at bay on his own side of the universe until the portal closed. At worst, I'd hoped that they would have lost their track over the desert. Just a little breath of wind would have been enough to hide our path, but we hadn't gotten it. I had gambled and lost. "Go tell the general," I said. "Tell everyone to move out into the trees. They'll be safe there. The Ngullian won't be looking for them anyway." Merrick nodded. I could feel him squinting at me, that cautious, skeptical look I knew so well. "What about you?" he asked. "I'll do what I should have done before." "The girl?" "She's my charge," I said without glancing at him. "Not yours." "Can I help?" "Get a spear if you must. I don't care." He just stood there staring at me. Finally I turned and pointed toward the camp, and guilty realization dawned in his eyes. He saluted, to me, and ran back toward Ciaret's tent. I spun away, moving a few steps into the trees. I needed counsel and help, but not from any mortal man. Not that any of them would believe that I could seek advice from the brethren. Most people couldn't even see them, or recognize them if they could, and so they had stopped believing in them long ago. Or at least they had stopped believing that their kind had anything to do with us. I knew better. Sometimes I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. "Onethil," I bent my head. "Onethil, hear me." I waited, holding my breath for half a minute before I realized it. It was always a chancy business, calling on the brethren. Once I had called on one of them only to receive his answer 3 years later. Time was unpredictable with them. Onethil was prompter than most, perhaps because his whole being was consumed with time and space. "I hear you," he said, his voice like the moon, and a moment later his golden light surrounded me. He came as force and power, not in the flesh, so I kept my gaze lowered. "Why do you call for me, Farseer?" "I've put us all in danger," I murmured, after letting out my breath a little too fiercely. There was never any point in trying to fool one of the brethren, and much as I hated to admit my mistakes and my limitations, the situation gave me no choice. Wouldn't Siarat love to hear me say that? "The Ungolian are almost here," I added, "and there are too many for me to defeat. You'll have to take her home. I can hold the portal if she is safe on the other side. I can draw them away from her. It's me they've been tracking anyway." The light sharpened and contracted, and I felt Onethil's presence before me as he took on a physical form. The weight of his power was almost more unbearable when he came in the flesh, and I stumbled a step beneath it before I caught my balance on a tree trunk. I glanced up to find him measuring me quietly, the darkness of his eyes wild against his golden skin. Of all the brethren, his gaze was the hardest to meet, because his eyes were not like men's eyes. It was as if his eyelids encircled windows into the night sky far from Makema, all pitch and void and filled with stars. "You could send her with the camp," he said, but he said it expecting my refusal. "I don't trust the camp, not if I'm not there to protect her." "And you know what that will mean for you?" he asked, "if you choose to face the Ungolian." Phantom pain inched up my arms, radiated over my chest, an echo of a terror I tried so hard to forget. "I know," I said, "but if they capture her, if she dies—" "I will bear her across," Onethil said, "but she will bear the burden of the voyage. And if she goes back now, you know she may forget everything and have no desire to remember. What will become of you then? It was not for no reason that I brought her here today." He leaned toward me, almost too close for comfort. "Pray that she too chooses to return." I let myself glance back toward her tent. After what I'd put her through, after how I'd treated her, would she want to come back? If she didn't— Onethil's question echoed in my mind. What then? If she gave up on us and chose to keep Pielthon locked in that other world, what would become of us? A vague notion elbowed into my mind. If she stayed away, maybe I could venture into her world and take the thing from her, even by force if she wouldn't give it to me voluntarily. But I would never dare. Everything inside me shuddered at the thought of touching the thing. And even if I did, even if I could, it wouldn't be safe with me. "I'll take my chances with her," I told Onethil. "And, Onethil, whatever happens tonight, if she wants to come back, you bring her back. Do you understand? If I'm alive, I give you leave to bear her across." He nodded, vast and fathomless. Behind us, farther into the trees, I could just hear the low thread of the Ungolian's wailing, keening cry weaving through the trees. "They have sensed you," Onethil said. "Of course they have," I said. "Get her out of here. I'll hold them off." He nodded and vanished. Merrick was just sprinting back toward Marilyn's tent as I left the sheltering trees. He had a spear, holding it idiotically with both hands as he ran. I wanted to ask him how long he'd been in training as a soldier, but decided it wasn't the best time to shatter what little misplaced self-confidence he had. "I'm ready," he called, nearly decapitating a pole brazier as he passed. When he joined me, I noticed he had a sword strapped to his back and daggers at both hips as well, and he only had 2 hands, just like the rest of men. I gave an inward sigh and hoped he would have the sense to flee when the Ungolian appeared. Leaving my long-bladed knife sheathed behind my back, I drew only the small, curved blade that hung at my hip. Merrick stared at it, or me, maybe, lips flapping noiselessly. He looked like he was about to say something about it, but then the dead wailing of the Ungolian picked up in a long, slow swell. I'd heard it more times than I cared to count, but it still made my skin prickle just like the first time. No one should ever have to get used to a sound like that. "That's them, isn't it?" Merrick asked. I tightened my hand on the white hilt of the dagger, reached inside, laid a calming hand on my tremoring heart, soothed the desperate effort of my lungs. In my mind I heard the echo of the words bequeathed to me along with the dagger, "With this blade you will never stand alone in battle." It almost made me smile because at just that moment Merrick gave up and did what any sensible person would do. He ran away. I let out a slow breath, trying not to feel quite so relieved, and steadied my stance for battle. The keening threatened to drown me, but I listened instead to my heart, the steady rhythm against my ribs. All the light of the torches and fires went out. They were nearly here. Then I saw them, ghosting between the tents, streaking straight toward me. In the darkness I thought I could see the blood-hued gleam of their eyes, the mirage of gray skin wavering, mercurial over dead skulls. Slow burning in my soul inched out into my veins. It crept down my arms, up my neck with a force-like sound. Drown, drown, drown. I pulled strength from the deepest pit of my soul, drawing it out with a fire that burned in my throat and fingertips. The power loosed all at once, a river bursting its banks, throwing my arms wide. I heard my voice tearing free, a wordless syllable into the night, and light flared all around me. The force of the power slammed into the first 3 Angulians, sending them flying back through the darkness. Their wailing turned to screams, faded too fast to silence. I dropped to a lower stance, waiting as the remaining 2 sidled forward, cautious now. Everything around me still throbbed in blinding white light, and my mouth tasted like blood, as if the voice had been ripped from my throat. My palms wept sweat. I swapped hands holding the blade, back and forth, to give myself a chance to wipe the dampness away on my pants. A long bronze dagger materialized from the first Angulian's cloak, gleaming like a sick thing in the shadows. I shifted my weight, but my thighs burned already from holding the crouch. I had used up so much strength, too much, too soon. Both Angulian had weapons drawn now, and they circled me like carrion birds, waiting for me to die. One of them inched closer and closer to the girl's tent, where I could still feel the throb and pull of the open portal. I darted toward him and flicked the tip of my knife at his arm, trying to draw his attention and his anger toward me. If he took too many more steps around me, he would feel the pull of the portal too, and would realize that his quarry had escaped him again. Just a few more minutes. Just a few more. The tip of my dagger grazed his arm, and he shrieked in pain. The pain always startled them. It was like they'd forgotten how it felt. He stared at his arm, then, snake-like, lashed his knife toward me. I saw it coming and dodged, but my legs were too weak, too unsteady. I moved too slowly, felt the razor-sharp edge dance over my shoulder. The white light of my vision burst into a red fog, and my feet stumbled over the broken earth. The next blow I didn't see as much as anticipate. It came low, from the first Angulian, a vicious upward jab toward my neck as I bent over. I spun, desperate, slashing with the knife as I turned. It raked over solid mass, but I couldn't see anything now. Didn't know where I had struck. For all I knew, I had fallen and scored the earth with the blade. I realized a moment later that I was flat on my back. My ears rang, and the earth tilted dizzily under me, the blood in my mouth mixing with bile. A shadow loomed up over me, and bronze flashed in the eerie forest light. I let my breath out in a sigh and stared up toward the treetops that were fading fast into shadow. At least the portal was closed, safely. And maybe the girl would have the sense to stay away in that other world, far away from ours. Here there was only death. I waited and waited, but the final blow never came. A sharp grinding pain dug into my ribs, sending a shower of stars over my already blinded vision. I tried to shift away from the metal-toed boot, but my body wouldn't obey. "Why don't you kill me?" I heard myself ask, the words liquid in my mouth. "We know who you are," one of them said. And the other asked, "Do you have information?" I closed my eyes, or I thought I did. I couldn't quite tell. "Never," I managed to say. "The portal," said the first. "Why was the portal open?" My heart froze just for an instant, fearing he had felt the open portal in Marilyn's tent. Then I realized he meant the one I had guarded in the Periston, and I let out a broken breath in relief. "No reason I will ever tell you." "We'll see about that," said the second. "Bring him." My arms jerked in their sockets as one of them dragged me upright. I tried to steady myself, but my muscles wouldn't respond. Tried again. My arms twitched a little, barely pulling back against the Angulian's grip. His fingers tightened, gray nails prodding into my wrist. I jerked my arm back hard, and with my last pitiful scrap of strength, I slammed my head against the place where I knew his would be. Through the explosion of pain, I felt the smug satisfaction of hearing the Angulian scream in surprise and agony. He dropped my arm to grab his head. It did me no good. I lost my balance and collapsed back onto the ground, cursing myself for my weakness. "Can you not control him?" the first Ungolian hissed. In the vague blur of my shadowed vision, I saw him rise up over me and draw back his arm. Chapter 8. Marilyn. Much too soon it was morning. Daylight streamed in through my window, and a crowd of grackles in the old magnolia filled the air with raucous whistles and clicks. And Mom stood beside my bed, an expression somewhere between concern, relief, and righteous anger clouding her face. I stared up at her through sleep-bleared eyes, too stunned to speak. I didn't need to. As soon as she saw that I was awake, she let me have it. "Marilyn, what on earth were you doing, going missing like that? We've been worried sick about you, as if your father—" Her voice died, and even though I turned my head away, I heard her sigh. "I'm just glad Damien found you when he did. What were you doing down there?" "Down where?" "Don't you remember? He found you down by the creek, sleeping under a tree. He practically had to carry you home." "Oh, you don't remember." I hesitated. "The creek? No." "What about what you were doing all day yesterday? Were you with anyone? We called Darcy, but she said she hadn't heard from you since Sunday." She frowned, studying me intently, then added, "We almost called the police." I thought about making something up, but clamped my mouth on the lie. At the same time, it struck me as odd. They only almost called the police. Apparently, they hadn't been that worried. Somehow I wasn't upset, just strangely curious. "I'm sorry," I muttered. "It won't happen again." My stomach sank as I said it. I hoped it wasn't true. "If it does," Mom said as she withdrew from my room. She didn't finish the threat, but I could guess what she would have said. I groaned and threw an arm over my eyes. My thoughts were churning, still spinning from the most vivid and surreal dream I'd ever had. It had felt so real, but it was full of impossibilities from start to finish. It could only have been a dream. Somehow the thought made me heart-achingly sad. I closed my eyes, wistful, hoping against hope that somehow I could slip back into it. But just like a dream, it was so hard to hold on to any of the images that I could still recall, and with every minute it was getting harder. Something about a desert and a camp in a forest full of silver-gray trees, and a boy named Yatol. His eyes, those strange and fierce and radiant eyes, were the only thing I could really remember clearly. If only I could see them again. It was just a dream. He doesn't exist. I swallowed back the raw lump in my throat, covering my face with my hands. It was just a dream. I couldn't let myself get upset over it. Grow up, Marilyn. I rolled over and glanced at my bedside clock. Almost 10 already, but I felt like I could have slept another 3 hours at least. I stretched my arms drowsily and levered myself upright, and found myself still in yesterday's clothes. Absent-mindedly, I bent to straighten the hem of my jeans. A thin trickle of pale sand sifted onto the floor. My breath caught in my throat, and I reached out tentatively to brush the grains, then turned down the hem on the other leg and watched even more sand scatter on my carpet. Sand. A desert. Except for that dream, I hadn't been anywhere close to sand in 3 years. My hand flew to the back pocket of my jeans. The medallion was there too, and I pulled it out and stared at it, running my fingers over the endless script. If it's real, I thought, if all that really happened, then I got there once. And if I got there once, then maybe I can go back. And I knew exactly who I had to talk to. Heart racing, I made a quick trip to the bathroom for a shower and other necessities. It must have been the fastest shower I had ever taken, summer style, hot then cold, while the sight of sand swirling out of my hair and down the drain made me giddy. I toweled off as quickly as I could, tugging on a fresh tee and a pair of non-dusty jeans, ignoring the little voice in my head that reminded me how much I had hated jeans yesterday. My hair was hopeless when it was wet, so I just combed out the drippy mouse-brown length and slipped an elastic tie over my wrist for later. Back at my dresser, I hesitated over my little makeup collection. I never wore much, certainly not in the summer, but for some reason I wanted to look my best today. Ridiculous, but just a little lip gloss would be perfect. I dabbed a bit on my lips, then added a dusting of eyeshadow. Not too much. I nodded resignedly at my reflection in the tiny mirror, tucked the medallion into my back pocket, then ran downstairs, stomping sandy sneakers onto my feet as I went. I caught sight of my mom standing at the kitchen island, so I gave up the idea of getting something to eat and made a mad dash for the front door. Marilyn. Of course I couldn't get past her that easily. She didn't glance up as I halted by the counter, but I knew she was waiting for an explanation. "Just going to the library," I said, trying too hard to sound casual. Should have been reasonable enough. I said the same thing at least once a week during the summers. The university's massive library was one of my favorite haunts, for all my best friends Darcy and Reagan teased me for it. I thought my mom would buy it, but she just gave me the strangest, stillest look I had ever seen. "Tony's shift starts at 1. He could give you a ride." I made a face. "Nah, that's okay. I don't mind the walk. Don't worry, I'll be back by lunchtime." She sighed, that thin, tense sigh she always gave when she wasn't very happy about something. I thought I glimpsed some sad weariness behind her eyes, too, but I couldn't understand it, didn't feel right questioning her. She gave me permission with a nod, so I grabbed a bottle of water and a granola bar and bolted out the door before she could change her mind. It was already sweltering, obnoxiously hot for the early summer month, with little curls of heat hanging over the pavement and making everything shimmer. The smell of magnolias wafted my way, and I shivered. I walked slowly, tracking from one patch of shade to the next, grateful for the water I had brought. The wind blasted relentlessly over me, hot and dry, parching as a desert. The thought reminded me of yesterday's day-long trek across the sand, and I realized all at once that my legs were killing me, protesting even the solid, unyielding surface of the sidewalk. But somehow my arms didn't show even the teeniest hint of sunburn. That made my heart sink. If I did take an all-day hike across the desert, how on earth could I have escaped unscathed? I could get a sunburn during a thunderstorm. I scowled and pushed the thought aside. I was not about to let logic interfere with my crazy hopes. 15 minutes later, I reached town. Brewer wasn't a very big place, not the sort of town you'd think would boast a university like ours. It had all the quaint parks, antique shops, and old-fashioned gas stations you'd expect in a small town, but also plenty of coffee shops and bookstores for the students. Mr. Danzy's little grocery store was the first one you came to as you headed down Main. It had been there as long as I could remember, and we knew Mr. Danzy and his usual customers as well as we knew our own neighbors. He practically felt like family, at least when he wasn't freaking me out. As I turned onto Main, I caught sight of him on the sidewalk outside his shop, sweeping up a shattering of broken glass. His round face shone bright red and glistened with perspiration, but as I crossed the street, he beamed a smile that I thought seemed a bit too forced. "Mornin'," he called. As I joined him, he waved a hand toward the shop and said, "Go right on in if you like. Store's open and all. Just cleaning up a bit out here." "Oh," I stammered. "What happened?" Mr. Danzy waved in exasperation toward the far side of town. "Oh, some hoodlums from the school threw some bottles out their car last night. Broke that window there. Got some people coming out later to fix it, sure." "But I thought they did that," I said, before I could stop myself. "They?" Mr. Danzy stopped sweeping. "They who, darling?" I stared at him, feeling sick. He talked to me the same way he always had, without even the slightest hint of what had happened yesterday. I'd hoped that he at least would know what I was talking about, that with him I wouldn't feel like I was going crazy. After all, he was the one who gave me the coin in the first place. I just shook my head and wandered into the shop. It was empty except for me. Somewhere in the back of the store, a bulky radio droned barely audible oldies. When Mr. Danzy finally came in, I had taken a seat on one of the old-fashioned stools at the counter. As a kid, I'd always liked to sit there when I came to the store with my dad, and Mr. Danzy would slip me a piece of candy while Dad got our groceries. Now I sat there with a cold emptiness in my heart, staring at the glass candy jars without seeing them. In one hand I clasped the medallion as if it would fade out of existence if I let it go, but I couldn't even recall its name. "Mr. Danzy, what happened?" "Well, like I was telling you, kids come round I chewed my lip and studied him through a scowl, and said, "Is this some kind of game? Look, this is going to sound totally crazy, but just hear me out, okay? I thought I went somewhere yesterday, but now I'm wondering if it was just a dream. It felt so real, but it was the kind of thing that should be impossible. Legitimately, scientifically, statistically impossible. But I want to go back more than anything. I know it sounds stupid, but I really don't think it was a dream. Because obviously you can't go back into a dream. Can't you help me? Don't you remember that happening? I was right in front of you when it happened. Right there." I stared at the battery display, feeling queasy. Mr. Danzy gave me a strange, sad little smile. Now, hon, I'm no professor like your daddy was, but I'll tell you what I think. I think if you want to get something back bad enough, you'll find a way. He smiled brightly and wandered back to the broken window, whistling to the oldies as he went. And then he just stood there, like he could keep the Texas heat out of his store by sheer force of will. I left the shop sullen and depressed and nearly walked into Damien. I shoved my hands in my pockets and fell into step beside him. "The library, huh?" he said, smiling mirthlessly at me. "Were you following me?" I grumbled. "Mare, is this about Dad?" "What makes you say that?" Damien shrugged, tossing back his golden head and hooking his thumbs in his belt loops. "I can tell." Of course he could. And yesterday was his birthday. I glared at him. "I don't know what it has to do with. I wish I could tell you, but really, I just don't know." I stopped abruptly, mid-syllable and mid-stride. A shadow had fallen over us, but no, there was nothing there. The street was just as bright and ordinary as ever, the blazing sun all alone in an endless cerulean sky. But that man standing by the wall across the street from us, he was watching me, his eyes bored into me. He saw me. He saw it. I knew it without looking at him. I knew I couldn't look at him. "Damien," I whispered. My throat felt like sandpaper. I reached out and touched his sleeve and felt his arm around my shoulders, supporting me. "What's wrong? God, Mary, you all right?" I blinked and risked a glance across the street. Empty. "He was just there," I cried. My lips felt numb, bloodless. "Damien, didn't you see him? He wanted it. He saw that I had it and he wanted to take it from me. He was one of them. He knows about me and he knows about him and all of them, and he'll find them and it's my fault. I left them, I betrayed them, and now they know where they are." I stumbled, choking on breath or tears or horror. Damien guided me to a stone bench and sat me down, crouching beside me with his hands gripping mine. I couldn't say a word now. My lips trembled and I wondered if I should have kept my mouth shut. I saw it all with perfect clarity, but I could tell from the worry in Damien's eyes that he thought I was delirious, or certifiable. More than anything, I wished I could explain it all, so that he could share it with me, whatever it was, dream or nightmare, but I couldn't say anything. "I'm going to get the car," Damien said. "Drink some of your water and don't get up, okay?" He backed a step and muttered as he turned away, "Too hot for a walk like that." I closed my eyes. Everything felt so dark, so lonely. A cold sickness clawed through me, strangling my heart. Maybe it was too late. Maybe they had already found the camp. But who? I didn't even know what they were. I didn't know anything, just that somehow everything felt wrong. It had all gone wrong, and it was my fault. Endless minutes crawled by. What was taking Damien so long? I glanced up, and my breath turned to emptiness in my lungs. That man in the hat. No, there was no one there. But there, across the street, that was the same man, or someone else. And then he was gone too. Everywhere I turned, he was there and gone, always staring at me, watching me. Then, standing beside me, a hand on my shoulder, a voice in my ear. "There is nothing, there is no one, nothing to fear, nothing to regret, nothing to seek, nothing to find, nothing." Stay tuned next time for the next 2 chapters. Bye, guys.